Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, thanks so much for joining today's podcast. We're talking with my buddy Charles on how to structure for growth. Every time your church grows or every time you see growth in the church, structure has to change. And what does that look like? We're going to be talking about that. It's a great conversation. Want to remind you to go to churchboom.org. If you are not part of the Church Boom Network, make sure you become a part of that. 4 years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, 37% of all pastors were part of a network. Now only 19% are. We need a network. We need a tribe. We need a place to belong. So check out churchboom.org and become part of the Church Boom Network. Let's jump into today's conversation. I know you're going to love it. Hey, man, let's jump into it. Tell me what's on your mind and how can I best serve you today?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to do a follow-up of a different episode. So you and Jeff Seaman talked in episode 150 about multiplying services. And first of all, there was so much gold in that one about, hey, 3 things that, create momentum in your church are new building, anytime you renovate something, and new services. And I was like, so good. And you talked about sort of the 3 things you should evaluate when you're getting ready to launch them with, hey, how's my kids doing? How's my parking lot? And how's my adult space on everything? And we're kind of just right before that moment of needing to launch a second service. Our adult space is we're probably running 70% on most weeks on stuff. So I sort of just want to talk through, like, how can I help us get up over the hump? I don't want to launch too soon. And I loved all the things you talked about, hey, get all those names of people and recruit them to launch a second service and begin that communication with them and even some huddles with them pre-stuff. I loved all of that, but I still feel like we're like 10% short of being ready to launch that second service. So what are some things I can do now to help us just generate that momentum and get excitement and roll us into that?
Well, when you talk about generating momentum and get us rolling into that, are you just talking about church growth itself, or are you talking about getting prepared to launch a second service?
Mostly prepared to launch a second service. My teams are all excited about it and have been working in the background to grow themselves and get ready for that moment.
Good.
We've sort of seen this coming down the pipeline for several months. We have sort of a trickle growth, if you will, nothing explosive, but we're growing by 3, 4, 5 people a month, pretty consistent. If we stay at that, we'll kind of hit a weird lull where it'll be summer when we'd be ready to multiply to a second service, and that seems non-ideal in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Well, so a couple thoughts. One, I think it's really great, Charles, that you are working with your leaders and your teams, or your leaders and your staff, to prepare. Often I see when someone goes to a second or third or fourth service, they don't ever stop to work with their teams and say, okay, so how many leaders will you need? How many volunteers will you need? What's the exact number? Because usually the answer is more, and that's not the answer. And it is a great opportunity when you're launching a second service. It's a great opportunity to revisit the structure. So that structure might be, hey, children's ministry, it might need, we might need to have captains over each service, or we might need to have a different way we look at it. It's a great opportunity for you to look at it with your teams when you're launching a second service, because the answer isn't just more. The answer is, how do we structure this better? Anytime something grows, structure has to change. You don't add stories to a building unless you're willing to change the structure. And it's the same thing with the church life. So I think that's an important thing. The other thing that I would talk about is building anticipation with your people and making sure your volunteers, your leaders, your people are excited about it, that they see the joy of it. They see that, man, hey, we're reaching people. I think that's an important part. The other part I would talk about is when you start thinking about the week after. And when launching, everybody always thinks the day. And I would think about, what about the 90 days after? What could we do to create a tremendous amount of momentum so we don't have one great service and then the other one no one wants to go to? You don't want that. So there's a lot of energy. You listen to the episode with Jeff Steeman. There's a lot of energy that goes into the launch, and that's awesome. But I also think you need to have energy going to, okay, what happens for the 90 days after? What could we do with kids? What could we do with after parties? What could we do with a special guest that unchurched people care about? Like what could we do that would create momentum? How could we make sure we're being strategic to create momentum after the launch day? Because it's more than just the launch day. It's the day after the launch day that matters as well, because that's when the momentum picks up. So that's an important part. So those are a couple of things that I would be thinking about as it results to of a second service.
That's good. You mentioned this is a great time to look at structures. Structures have to change to grow. And I think that ties in well with sort of that second question that I have for you. So we're 170, give or take, and I always hear 200 is it's a hard thing to break, and you have to totally change your structures in order to do that. What are some of the things that I need to be looking at right now in my own leadership to build so that we can break that 200 and just keep on cruising through?
Yeah. So it's again, it's not, and we'll talk about you, but it's not just you. It's everything. It's, well, how do we do children's? How do we do worship? Well, we do worship the same. Well, maybe not. The children's group, okay, children's leader, do they have a staff? Do they have 4 people on their team that are structuring each of the services? So now all of a sudden it's not just children's worker and a children's leader and all the workers. It's our children's workers, which is usually this, children's workers and classroom coordinators. Well, what if they had an event coordinator? What if she had a communications coordinator? And now they're operating as a team. So that starts to change. For you, that needs to change for that, because yours starts shifting slowly. I wouldn't say it's overnight, from ministering to people to ministering through people. And now the children's worker is building a bigger team, and she or he is doing, whatever, and the worship's the same, and the first impressions is the same, or guest relations or whatever. They're building teams, they're building staff, they're building their own thing, they're creating their own tribes. I think that's an important thing. Well, not their own tribes, but a tribe, a sub-tribe inside of the overall church tribe. You, on the other hand, your change is it starts to change slowly, not overnight, but slowly it starts to change where you spend your time. It's back to that mission critical. I think you and I have talked about that before, but remember the statement in mission critical is, if I don't do blank, our future's threatened. The question is, what's the blank? If I don't do blank, our future's threatened. What's the blank? And that's what you want to be looking at. So figuring out, where do I start to spend a little less time in and a little more time over here? Remember, you never get to add hours. You only get to trade them. So you got to start thinking, like, where do I spend most of my time? What is the best place for me?
So early on, I would have said mission critical for me was preaching, but now what we're saying is, no, it's leading these team leaders so that they're accomplishing the mission to continue forward on things.
Part of that, well, I would say communication is still part of it, and I would put preaching under communication. Your communication might be social media, your communication might be preaching, your communication might be leadership training. There's a lot that goes under communication. But at this point, you developing leaders, you developing staff, you're the one that does it. So staff and key leader development is very crucial, because now you get up to 500 and you get an executive pastor and they start helping you with that, and it starts to shift again. But right now, you're communicating, no question that's a big thing. All things leadership development, no question that's a big thing. All things vision has to come from you. And I would say the fourth one is you start ministering to high potential capacity people, donors and people that just want relationship with you. That's an important part of it.
Man.
So those are kind of the things where you start moving your mind your heart, your time towards. Yeah, that'd be very important. You can't operate the same way. You start shifting. When you get to 500, it's completely different. You get to 1,000, it's completely different. You start changing everything. Everything starts to change. What meetings you go to, what meetings you don't go to, all changes.
You mean there's a time when I don't have to go to meetings?
Yeah, less of them. But yeah, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? But yeah, there you go. So it all changes. It's always changing.
Yeah, that's good. Man, that's it. You've answered all my questions today.
Man, dude, you are easy. That was easy.
It was. So
Yeah.
you had a chance to be with us this last fall. Anything for, hey, here's some other things to be thinking about, or feedback on stuff, or
Yeah.
lean in on some of these sorts of areas from what you saw?
Yeah. I have a few thoughts. One is, I was with you, I think, last year. We did a Rescue Sunday. It was awesome. You have a great church. I think you've got great people. I would say that I noticed, I think that they're all wonderful people, but I would say they lean towards being more doer than they lean towards being more leader. That's just my opinion. Just watching them, I'm thinking they don't have, watching them run around and hustle, which, of course, you're a church plant, you're setting up and tearing down at a school, you're hustling. I get it. But I don't sense from them the eagerness or understanding of, like, we've got to develop leaders. We got to raise people up to do what we do. We got to get to a point where I don't really need to lead worship all the time. I don't need to do the children's all the time. I could just kind of check in because everything's running good. I've got leaders that are better than me. That's an important part. Raising up leaders to be just as good or better than the ones you have. They have to start understanding that. They're amazing people, but developing leaders and building big teams, it's everything for the growth of the church. Because without the depth of leadership, you're not going to happen. Without getting people in, the speed of engagement we've talked about, it's not going to happen. So that's probably the thing that stood out to me the most. Them realizing and valuing and prioritizing developing leaders and building teams, I think, is such a big part of that.
Yeah, I'd say that's huge. I would certainly say that there are a tremendous number of doers that are on our team right now that are helping to get done the job that we're doing every single week
Right.
On stuff. It's
Right.
been incredibly valuable, but as we're transitioning, more development of leaders is going to be crucial.
Yep, it is. It is. So that's what I would be doing. I'd be developing leaders right now, making sure your team's developing leaders, you're developing leaders. It's crucial. It's like you want to be just this, man, you look around and just like, man, we got so many leaders. If the worship person or the children's pastor gets, sick for 8 weeks, we're okay. We've got so many leaders behind them. That's what we got to kind of build to. And I think it's important for you to start thinking about, where do I spend my time? Your time has to be in certain areas. The more you spend your time in the right areas, the more you'll grow. A lot of people, pastors that are making the jump from 200 to 400, that kind of thing, they're so used to hustling. They're so used to doing everything. And if they're honest, some of them become addicted to busy. And if they're honest, they find more instant gratification in knowing, man, I had to run the errand today. I went to the graphic designer today. I picked up the stuff at Costco today. And they feel like, whew, I accomplished something. I'm not saying they didn't, but they get addicted to the instant gratification. The larger you grow as a church, your personal gratification becomes delayed. You're raising up 10 leaders and you don't really see the fruit for it. But once you get 3 stellar leaders out of 10, you're like, man, this was worth it. But that'll take 12 months. You start working with 4 or 5 high-level donors in your church, and you're just having a relationship with them, going to lunch with them, hanging out with them on a 2-day vacation, going to a concert with them. And you're like, why am I doing all this? And then all of a sudden you need to raise $800,000, and it comes from 4 people. You start to realize, like, oh, okay, everything for you. You have to become less and less addicted to busy and less addicted to instant gratification, because the more you're developing, it's long-term results is what you end up getting to. And a lot of guys have a hard time making that flip. So something for to think about as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, that first part of hustling through everything, you've got to-do lists and checklists, and it is
Yep.
satisfying to knock those things off your list all the time.
Yeah. Right. And you feel like, oh, I did something today, and or I did something this week. And I get that, but you have to start making the shift and realize like, oh, so it's like me. I'll take a flight to go coming up to it's only a couple hour flight. So I'll do a 2 hour flight in the morning. I'll have lunch with a guy, get back on the plane in 2 hours back. It's like the fourth time I've met with the guy. But he's he believes in us. He gives to us. He helps us. He introduces us to people. So people are like, wow, it's a full day. I'm like, yeah. And I probably won't ask him for anything for 10 more months. But when I do, it's different because I know his gifting and I know his love for the ministry. So it's like, wow, it's a whole day. I wasted a day. No, you didn't waste a day. Just wait a year from now when you need something and he's there to help you. That's delayed gratification. So anyway, hey man, always good to see you. Always great talking with you, man. And if you ever need anything, just let me know. I'm always here to serve and always here to help.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And man, I love listening to these, and I get so much from them. And thank you for your time and just the way that you're growing.
Of course. Of course. Anything I can do for you, always here to help, man. Have a good day, buddy.
You too.
Hey, thanks for joining us today with my buddy Charles and talking about structuring your church for growth. I want to remind you to check out churchboom.org and to sign up and become part of the Church Boom Network. We all need a tribe. We all need to be growing together. We all need to be developing together, and that's what the Church Boom Network is all about. So go to our website, churchboom.org, and sign up today for the Church Boom Network. I know you'll love that. We'll see you on the next podcast.